I'm Ashley Roque, and I'm here at the Reagan National Defense Forum in Simi Valley, and we're joined today with Army Undersecretary Gabe Camarillo. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Ashley. It's great to be here.
You just came off a recruiting panel.
I did.
So the Army's had a couple years in a row of tough recruiting. Last year, they came up 10,000 short of their stretch goal of 65,000. Can you sort of walk me through the steps that you're taking to correct this going forward?
Absolutely. Well, the first thing we can do is to try to take advantage of those factors that are within our control. You know, for example, we can't control the rising obesity rates of America's youth population. We can't control the declining propensity to serve across the country. But what we can control is how we're doing our recruiting functions. So what Secretary Wormuth announced just last month was really the biggest transformation of the Army's recruiting effort really since 1975, when we went to the all-volunteer force. And while there's a lot of things we're doing below that, let me just highlight a couple of them.
Please.
First and foremost, it is recognizing that we need to change who we are prospecting to. So if you look at 1970s, the early 70s, roughly, about only 40% of America's high school graduates made the decision to go on to college, to a four-year college. Now that number is in the 70% range. So that means that even though we are recruiting to the same high school graduate population, there's a smaller and smaller portion of them available in the country. So one of the things we're doing is changing to try to prospect some individuals, young men and women who have some college experience, who are not just high school graduates. And then the second thing we're doing there is we're making that future soldier prep course that's helping to improve our young people's performance on academic skills as well as their physical skills. We're making that permanent. And then third, of course, one thing we're doing is we're professionalizing a specialized and permanent recruiting workforce on the military side. So we're going to create its own MOS as part of this and give it the dedicated time and training to do talent acquisition in a very professional way, much like we see the private sector do.
Great. And I think I heard you say on the panel today that you haven't sort of set the goal for FY24. What are some of the factors going into that decision?
We're pretty close to finalizing it. I think the first factor we want to do is we want to look at ensuring that we are going to put more potential contracts into what's called our delayed entry pool. It's our DEP. It's kind of like a savings account that carries over from one year to the next. Okay. So if you look at how we finished FY23, we were able to, obviously achieve 50,000 new contracts, but we also put about 4,600 into that DEP bank account. So we want to make sure we're targeting about 5,000 for that. And then we're looking at something around 50,000 for contracts of people who are on the payrolls as new recruits at the end of FY24. And if you combine those two together, that would be an enhancement from what we performed last year of about 5K. Okay. It's still a stretch goal, but that's something we're kind of looking at right now.
Okay. I'll circle back on that.
Yes.
I also wanted to ask about the budget situation. The entire department and government is operating on the continuing resolution right now, which means you're sort of not in FY24, you're still held at FY23 levels. But at the same time, there's a supplemental from the White House for $105 billion, sort of waiting in the House. So can you sort of walk me through some of these budgetary concerns you're grappling with?
It really is the perfect storm for us right now, and it creates a really challenging and difficult fiscal set of circumstances in the near term. So they're all interconnected. So as you all know right now, it's absolutely critical that we get a supplemental to fund, for example, our operations costs and industrial base enhancements for Ukraine, as well as the supplemental covering, obviously, costs for what the deployments that we're doing in CENTCOM. Without that supplemental being approved by Congress, the Army, in its own base funds that we have available right now, we are footing the cost for the deployments, for example, to Europe and to CENTCOM to provide that deterrence mission. So to the tune of several hundred millions of dollars, we are fronting those costs that would otherwise be paid for in a supplemental. Correspondingly, what that means is that it puts a lot of pressure on our ability to spend the money we needed to spend on other activities in the base budget that we're not accounting for us having to do that. So I made the example in the recruiting panel about the fact that we need to place media buys several months in advance. We need to make sure that we're planning for major recruiting events and talent fairs across the country. Our ability to do so is challenged. And then with the year-long CR, what it does is it sets us back at last year's levels. Yep. So any planned increases that we had hoped to do, we're not able to do in the near term. And I'll give you another example of that. The military pay raise goes into effect in January, which is fantastic for our soldiers, and it's great. we have to pay that even though we're in a potential CR situation. So the military personnel accounts, the same accounts that were now being funded at FY23 levels, have to also absorb that increase at the same time, and we don't even get the benefit of the FY24 appropriation. So it's absolutely critical that we get this. Every month we go through this challenge, it's really hurting us.
Okay, and then also on the supplemental, I think the Army Acquisition Chief had mentioned there's $3.1 billion in it for 155 millimeter artillery rounds. Sort of trying to get to that goal of 100,000 by 2025.
Yeah.
What happens if you don't get the supplemental spending on that?
It is absolutely hurting us. We are right now in an industrial-based mobilization challenge as we're trying to support Ukraine. Industry is postured. They are ready to invest in the enhanced manufacturing capacity, but we are deferring that until we can get the funds that they need to be able to put this on contract. So what that means, it's more time on the back end until we can restore and replenish our own munitions stockpiles, and it is further away when we get to the goal of being able to provide 155 artillery, not just for Ukraine, but also for our other partners and allies that are depending on us for FMS cases.
Okay, great. And then while I have you, I wanted to ask about lessons learned in Ukraine and potentially how you're sort of gleaning those lessons or observations, whatever word you want to give it, to sort of funnel it into modernization programs, whether it's ground vehicles or EW or any other capabilities. Just sort of how is that working almost 2 years in?
Well, it's an ongoing and continuous process. I wouldn't say it's static. So one of the things that we're doing, for example, and we're continuing to learn, the UAV threat, as I always said, is very, very real, is what we're learning from Ukraine. So the range of capabilities that the Ukrainians are employing to counter the UAS, the small UAS threat, whether it's a combination of kinetic capabilities, obviously directed energy is another one, and how we can plug and play that into an architecture that will give soldiers in a future conflict a lot of flexibility in a layered defense. That's one example. Another one, they're using armored vehicles, and what we're learning from the Ukraine conflict is that having armored vehicles that are lightweight, can support in a contested logistics environment, that don't have a large electromagnetic signature, and that are obviously not vulnerable to top-down attacks. Those are the kinds of things that are certainly informing our thinking, and you saw that as we're looking ahead to a future Abrams upgrade program. Those are just two examples.
Anything else you want to add before we wrap up here?
Oh, just to emphasize how critical it is that we get some certainty in the fiscal outlook.
Okay. Thank you, Secretary Camarillo.
All right. Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you.
It's great.